time when only 11 women are serving as heads of state, when in our collective political history, only 32 women have served as leaders of the opposition, when there have been less than 26 female ministers of justice, Tzipi Livni is the only woman in the world who has held the position of Minister of Justice, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and of Vice Prime Minister, as well as the leader of the opposition. And along with another very famous Secretary of State, won the popular vote in her country. Newsweek rankings have included Tzipi as a woman who shakes the world. And it is uplifting to note that one of the reasons why Newsweek calls her a woman who has shaken the world is because she's an active advocate for women's rights and gay rights. So Tzipi, in 2010, when you were the head of the opposition, and in marking the 10th anniversary of 1325, the Security Council resolution, at the Knesset hearing, you argued that including women in peace talks was not just a mere gesture on gender equality, but it would be in Israel's national interest. So could you elaborate more on the reasons how women's equality and having women in leadership, both in government and in peacemaking, is in the best interest of Israel?
Well, basically, it's the best interest of their own countries to have women as leaders and especially as negotiators. Because negotiation is not just to enter the room with ideology or with views, it's the understanding of where the other side stands. It's to keep the ego outside of the negotiations room. And this is something that I discovered when I was foreign minister, that this is something that represents basically women. And we are acting more in accordance to our inner compass, according to our values. And this is something that I believe is very important. And therefore, especially when it comes to aspiration for peace, even now in Israel, you have a group of women marching together, preaching, crying, demanding peace. And this is something that I highly respect. And this is something that I see women doing and less men.
So you have said it is women's rights to determine the future of their country, and their power is first and foremost political. And the struggle begins with women's own understanding that yes, we can, and the public understanding that it is in the best interest of the state. So what can we do to enhance that public understanding on women's political power?
We need to be strong and to make it to speak in a very clear and loud voice. Security is not the monopoly of men. Security is not the monopoly of the army. Security is something which is broader than just a military operation. We have the capability, the ability, and the right to define our own future. We are more than 50% in population, but in decision-making, we are so much less. And there's a need to bridge this gap, as you said, not just for gender equality, but for the best interest of our nation.
And you have brought something unique to the peace negotiating table, which has been enormously important in understanding the role of women in negotiating peace. In the literature on peace and peace studies, there is this examination of what do women bring to the table. And you have said it very evocatively that what is most important is trust, to build trust, that even when we disagree, we need to dignify the other, and that even when we say no, we understand their recommendations and the ways in which that negotiation takes place. So can you give us some examples of that?
I can give an example. During the negotiations on peace between Israel and the Palestinians, we had a discussion on security. And we had a general in the room, and he said to the Palestinians that the future Palestinian state would be demilitarized because we need to defend Israel and this and that. And we were going on like this for hours and hours, and then we had another meeting. And then I asked them, listen, why you don't accept the idea of the future state to be demilitarized? Do you really want tanks and aircrafts and everything? And they said, no. So I said, so why is that? And they said, because it's about our dignity and our sovereignty. I said, okay, fine, I can respect this. So let's agree that you will have your own state, and with your own sovereignty, dignity, and willingness, you would decide that it would be demilitarized. And this was the understanding. Instead, entering into the blame game and this, we just find the way to respect each other and to give an answer and to give a solution to a huge problem of Israel's security.
And I think as a woman leader, there is this inherent understanding of the importance of respect and the importance of dignifying the other. But Tzipi, in your very distinguished political career, you yourself have said that you came to seeing yourself as a woman leader rather late in your political career, right? And you have said this, that there is a twisted logic which says that defense issues belong to men. I went into politics because of my involvement in diplomacy and regional issues. Women's rights were not my issues at the beginning. So can you speak a little bit about that evolution and that journey?
I need to confess, it was not just that it was not part of my agenda. I need to confess that at first, when a woman is in politics, we need to be strong and to make this image or perception that we are not dealing just with women's stuff. And therefore, for many years, I didn't understand the importance or how symbolized and how much strength I give women when I'm in politics. Because I joined politics because I have my own view, my own vision, what needs to be done in terms of peace and security for Israel. And then I discovered that I give strength to other women. And then I discovered another thing. When I ran for office to be the Prime Minister of Israel, I got the support of women. Mm-hmm. And it was so touching, moving, strengthening. And I said, okay, we are all together. And this was the moment in which I understood truly this sisterhood stuff, that we are together, that we have something to fight for all together, even though we are all different. And the most touching event was during this campaign when a young girl, the age of 12 or so, new immigrant from Ethiopia, came to me with flowers and a letter, and I read the letter, and she said, something that she respected me, loved me, and then she said, I also want to be a prime minister when I'm old, when I grow up. And I said, wow, an immigrant, a newcomer to Israel from Ethiopia, she looks at me and she say, I want to be a prime minister. So I did something, even by just running for office, I gave hope to another girl that she can do it, and we can do it.
And it's not just to the women and the young women of Israel that you have given hope. You have changed the aspirations of women all over. Young women all over see you in the most challenging circumstances and want to follow in your path, Tzipi. So I wanted to know that what you have inspired in Israel has resonance around the world. And that is something that I want to touch on more, because I feel that women's leadership is now more than ever the cause of our time, and is the reason why women around the world are mobilizing in order to make sure that women, both in the public and the private sphere, are able to shatter the glass ceiling. But one question that I want to ask you, Tzipi, is what do women uniquely bring to the table in terms of a new liberal global order? So the Council of Foreign Relations reports that, looking at your own trajectory, that you advocated for all parties to ignore political distractions and to discuss concrete agenda items. Even when others were ready to filibuster talks over procedural matters, you made them look at these concrete agenda issues. So I want you to tell us some stories. Share with us some stories on how you did that.
You know, this is true, but it's not only me. I would like to have another story. In the end of a military operation in Gaza, leaders came, heads of state came to Israel, and then they continued their travel to Egypt. And we were discussing, you know, the situation in the region. Now, came to Israel the Prime Minister of Britain, and Sarkozy was the President of France, and Berlusconi was then the President of Italy, and Spain, and Angela Merkel. And we were sitting there. You know, it's the end of a military operation. We are all, you know, trying to achieve something in the global fight against terror and some conclusions. And they were talking there, talking, starting to speak about football. And then talking about other issues, and I said nothing. I mean, I was not the Prime Minister, I'm just the Foreign Minister. And then Angela Merkel said, okay, what are we doing next? What decisions we need to make? And then I met her later and said, you see, I was sitting there hoping that somebody would say so. And it's quite symbolic that the only one who decided to say, okay, let's make a decision was a woman.
And the two women collaborated, got together to make sure that the men focused on the real issues at the table. I think that is so important, and that's, I think, what the Council on Foreign Relations says, that you are able to bring that piercing focus on the issue so that men are not distracted by either ideologies, politics, or football.
Mostly, I think that it's mostly about ego. This is my feeling when I look back and think about all the discussions that we had. Firstly, you know, I don't want to be unfair for men. Some of them truly believe in the need to achieve peace and are working for it. So it's not just women who want to achieve peace. But I think that when it comes to men, it's a matter who would force the other side to do something while we are trying to find a compromise. It is less about winning and losing. It is more about finding the common denominator.
So that's a very interesting issue that you've raised, the issue of ego. And when I look back on your journey and your history and the very powerful comments that you have made, you have said that, and this is what you've said at the Kennedy School about 10 years ago, Israel doesn't have peace with its neighbors. I entered Israel politics in order to change this. That was my decision to leave my profession, to leave something that may bring hope, but also a better future for generations to come to Israel. You have said that your work and the reason why you got into politics was not because of your parents, but because of your boys, because of your children, and for generations to come. So that is your motivating factor. That's what inspired you. Yes, and I think that's what makes this so unique, a journey.
Yes, maybe, but you know, I'm thinking now that I decided to join politics because I wanted to leave my two sons a better state in a way and a better situation. I'm a lawyer by profession, so I could earn more money, but it was not enough. But now they were then 5 and 8. Now they are 30 and 27. And we didn't reach this moment in which I can, you know, say, we did it. And I feel sad for this. Really.
Oh, yes. You have always said there is hope.
We should continue. We should continue. And I believe that also there is an opportunity now in the region. And but you know something, the leader who would make peace is the leader who understands that not having peace takes a higher price than the political price that he or she would pay by making peace. This is, I believe, the battle. And we need these leaders now.
You have always said, let us not be cynics. Let us be the realists who dream. Let us be those
Yes,
people.
this is something that I said at the beginning of the negotiations in Washington with Secretary Kerry and with Saib Arikat, the negotiator on the other side, from the other side. I cannot be cynic. I mean, the only way for me, or the only reason for me to be in politics, because I believe in something. And I can be angry, I can be frustrated, I can be hopeful, but it is all a matter of feelings and not, a professional story for me to be in politics. It is more about beliefs.
As a woman political leader, you went through challenges that most male leaders don't always face. Can you share with us some of the challenges that you faced that are particular to your gender?
Frankly, I cannot think about... It is true that my experience in decision-making in Security Cabinet is something that rare are facing in Israel at all. But I don't, I cannot think about example of...
You did say that when you first decided to run for office, you called your mother, and her first question is, what about your boys? Yes. Right? And those are questions that women political leaders often...
Oh, this is something I didn't understand that you referred to this. Of course, not only the conversation with my mother. Well, first she said, she was speaking about my husband, about my sons. And then, by the way, and she said, you'll be hurt. So she felt that this is not a place maybe for her girl. But this is something on a daily basis. This guilty conscience as a mother. When people are asking you, well, you are in politics, you are having a career. What about your children? Like I'm abandoning my kids for myself or because I want to do something for myself. This is something, and when it comes to... It took me some years, by the way, to understand that what I'm doing is okay, even as a mother. And this is something that I say to young women that are thinking about career, and they say, okay, what we do with the children? I say, it's fine. They know when we love them, and don't have this guilty conscience. And I hope that it works.
And these are not questions that men never have to face. Male political leaders are never asked, what about your children?
Never.
Right? It is somehow this feeling that women politicians
are... I am abandoning my children for my own good or my own career. This is something that a man would never asked. I so get used to it, so I didn't even, it's now. But, when I reached higher position, less and less questions I was asked about this. But the questions change. For example, when it comes to Israel security, you know the story, like in the US, who would answer the phone at 3 a.m. in the morning? Well, it's okay if a woman would answer and say, hello, yes, I'm giving you the prime minister, I'm giving you the man. And this is something that we are not over yet. This is not over yet. This is something that we need to address.
So, Tzipi, when I examine your journey as a woman leader, what I see is the way in which you have transformed national security into a women's issue and women's issues into national security issues. And that has been, I think, an inflection point in your own career.
For me, it was the obvious. I mean, I joined politics because I believe that we need to solve the conflict with the Palestinians. I joined the Security Cabinet, make decisions on war and, unfortunately, on wars and military operation. And for me, it was the obvious. But I discovered that it's not obvious also for women. There are those women thinking that only the guys, the general men, can decide on Israel's security. And this is an image that I'm trying to break. Successful enough but it's not over yet. I can still hear these voices. Even now in Israel, before the next election, people are looking for a general to join politics because he can take care of Israel's security, but it's really doesn't so, and they proved. And this is something that changed even the way the Israeli army thinks, that any military operation is not just from a military perspective, but also we need to add to this some diplomacy. We need to work with the world, with the Security Council. And this is something that changed the way people think. So I hope that this is the beginning of a bigger change.
I want to dig a little deeper into what you said, the confluence of diplomacy and security, and that you can't do one without the other. Exactly. Right? So can you speak a little bit more about that in terms of contextualizing it in Israel?
We are all facing challenges, and we have threats and terrorist organizations, and wars now are asymmetrical. It's not between states, that you have two states fighting, then reaching an agreement, and hopefully peace. This is not the situation anymore. We have terrorist organizations that represent a religious war. They would never accept us. Now, for us, victory is one thing. For them, victory is just survival. And if they survive, the day after, their leader can come and say, we won. And so the nature of victory changed. And therefore, in order to gain victory, it's not just to have the best military operation, but you also need to have the support of the international community and minimizing the damage and delegitimizing this terrorist organization, because most of them want to have the legitimacy of the world. And therefore, just a combination of these two things, military operation when needed, but also in order to, in the end of this military operation, we need to have Security Council resolution. We need something that make it clear, one, that Israel has the right to defend itself. Secondly, that these terrorist organizations don't have legitimacy. And this is something that you can do with diplomatic tools, not with arms.
So that diplomacy, those diplomatic skills are skills that you have really embraced. When you look at your journey, the way in which you've built those diplomatic relationships with the United States, with the United Nations, is really a hallmark of your career, more so than other political leaders.
I want to share with you, I gave the last answer. I remember a day in the second war in Lebanon, and there was a decision whether to continue this war or to stop it. And I voted against it, against the continuous of the operation, because I thought that this would lead to deterioration. And it was Friday, and I came back home, and I said to my husband, listen, I voted against all the others. I believe that this was the right decision, but I'm sure that they would use it to say, yes, she's a woman, she was afraid, and this is why she made this decision. And maybe this would be the end of my political career. And 2 days later, apparently it was really the right decision, and all the others make the mistake. But it was clear to me that there will be those that would abuse it to say this is just because she's a woman and she's afraid to fight.
So that's a great example of how you always stood by your principles and never compromised your values, even if it meant that it was inimical to your political career.
Yes, I cannot act in a different manner. This is who I am.
And those principles and values are ones that you've never compromised.
There are priorities in life, but up to a limit. I mean, maybe my red lines are different. I believe that everybody has some red lines, but there is no reason for me to be in politics without doing what I believe is right. For me, it's really a matter of right and wrong. And so I can have some priorities, but I cannot give up my values. Because, I said to some of my friends when I joined politics, I said, when I become like all the other politicians, tell me so I can quit.
And you have also said those are Jewish values. Those are democratic values.
Yes, talking about the nature of the state of Israel, we are talking about Israel as a Jewish democratic state. And there are those thinking that being the nation state of the Jewish people is more important than giving equal rights to all the citizens. And I say, no, we need to have this balance. We need to have both. And equality is not a favor that the Jewish state is doing to democracy. It's part of our values. I mean, love thy neighbor, it's written in the Bible. It's not written in any constitution. And therefore, this is part of who we are.
And, you started off with seeking your mother's blessings, right? And then at the end of her life, she blessed you to go forward as a woman political leader.
It was more than that. The first phone call, as I said, she said, well, they will harm you. You'll be affected. And then after years, she was very sick. She was dying in the hospital. And I came to visit her like every day. And it was the first day of the opening session of the parliament. And I needed to go to Jerusalem, but I said nothing. I stayed with her. And she said to me, listen, go to Jerusalem. They need you there. Be strong. And I went to Jerusalem, and when I came to Jerusalem, after an hour, I got a phone call from the doctor saying, come back, she's gone.
But to some extent, it is mother to daughter, that legacy.
Yes, I must say that my mother's views, vision, ideology was different than mine. And some of her friends attacked her because I'm preaching for peace and this is against the ideology of Greater Israel and everything. And after she died, and I heard about it, and I asked, so what was the answer? And the answer was, she's my daughter, and my daughter is always right. Meaning that the love of a mother is more than ideology.
And it's unconditional. It is unconditional. And the belief in the daughter. Last question about our daughters and our sons.
I hope I would have granddaughters in the future.
What hopes do you have for our daughters and our sons in Israel and around the world? What words of advice would you give our young law students and our young lawyers in their political careers and in their careers in public service as peace negotiators?
Firstly, I am worried now as a citizen of the world when I see some of the trends. Liberal values are becoming less legitimate, and we see more populistic leaders that are exploiting fear all over the world. And I hope that young, whether it's men and women, that joining the public service or political life would act in accordance to these values. It can work, because I know that the advices that they would get is you need to choose if you want to be in politics, act like politician. No, you can be in politics and act in accordance to these values, and it can pay also politically.
Tzipi Livni. She has had an unparalleled political journey in Israel and around the world. I could say this with strong conviction that there's no woman who has held as many ministerial portfolios, including that of Minister of Justice, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Leader of the Opposition, and Vice Prime Minister. There's no woman leader who has in one lifetime, managed to occupy every level of political leadership. And as we wish her goodbye, we wish that she will break that highest and hardest glass ceiling